Bill 47 in the Queen City, Boomer Von Cannon, WBT. Huh?
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. We start off with some news this morning about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They are now being accused of instructing volunteers to avoid homes displaying Trump signs following Hurricane Milton, not only in Florida, where initial reports surfaced, but we are learning details yesterday about homes with Trump signs in western North Carolina after the impacts of Hurricane Helene. Marty Washington, who is the former FEMA worker who was fired after a text chain was leaked that showed her instructing colleagues to, quote, avoid houses that had Trump signs in their yard, told the Daily Mail that FEMA is lying about the scandal and making her a scapegoat of a wider practice. She said she has proof that FEMA is lying and that other FEMA employees have also done the same thing. Washington also told YouTube podcaster Roland Martin that FEMA, quote, preaches avoidance first and then de-escalation, noting that this the situation in Florida and in western North Carolina, or situations, are not isolated. She said this is a colossus event of avoidance, not just in the state of Florida. You can find avoidance as well in North Carolina. At an October the 15th briefing on the recovery efforts in western North Carolina, at the time, Democrat Governor Roy Cooper stressed that there was a lot of, quote, misinformation ongoing about recovery efforts in western North Carolina and that they must stop, saying those rumors hurt those who need help the most. Roy Cooper and FEMA did not respond to requests from comment from Carolina Journal, and they still have not done so as of now. We have heard some comments from Senators Thom Tillis and Roy Cooper, Senator Ted Budd, saying, quote, this will be investigated. Anyone who abuses the power of the federal government to hurt North Carolinians is needed and will be held accountable. I will personally see to it. That's U.S. Senator Ted Budd on X yesterday. It's a very interesting saga. We'll continue to follow it here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:07. We have got an update on a legal challenge this morning surrounding a former North Carolina congressman. To get more details on that, it's my pleasure to welcome Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation back to our airwaves this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Mitch, appreciate the time. Mark Meadows making news yesterday morning across the state of North Carolina.
That's right, and nationally as well. Mark Meadows, of course, was the multi-term congressman in western North Carolina in the 11th District before, in the last year of the first Trump administration, he became Donald Trump's White House chief of staff. And that's the role in which he caused some controversy and also got himself into some legal trouble. The DA in Fulton County, Georgia, charged Mark Meadows, along with some others, including Donald Trump, with trying to interfere in the outcome of the 2020 election. Now, Meadows, as White House chief of staff, said, wait a minute, this is not something that a state court should be able to charge me with. I want to have this case moved from the Georgia state court to the federal court. And then once it gets to the federal court, I'm going to argue that I have immunity because I'm being charged in connection with official actions that I took as White House chief of staff. So Mark Meadows tried to have the case moved from the Georgia state courts into the federal court. A trial judge said, no, the actions for which you're being charged with election interference don't have anything to do with your role as White House chief of staff. So I'm not going to take this case. It was appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. That court once again said, no, this is not something that should be moved from state court to federal court. The chief judge, William Pryor, in the 11th Circuit, wrote the opinion in that case. And then so Mark Meadows appeals to the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court, asking the justices to take the case and saying that this is a controversy that should be settled by the federal courts, because he was a federal official working in his official role as White House chief of staff, not to have the case remain in the state courts. And in a decision that had no commentary. It was just on a list of orders in a bunch of different cases that the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to take. They decided not to take this case, which means that the only recourse now is for Mark Meadows to fight this case in the Georgia state courts, which is where it stands now.
You know, it's interesting. We've seen just since last week when Donald Trump won his election, is now President-elect Trump, we've seen a lot of his legal challenges, Mitch, essentially evaporate. But for individuals like Mark Meadows that were around that Trump circle, they're still having to deal with some of this recourse at this point in time, 4+ years after all of this is said and done. It's rather interesting.
It is interesting, and the timing of this decision from the U.S. Supreme Court is also interesting. Now, I wouldn't read a whole lot into it because the U.S. Supreme Court decides regularly whether to take or not take cases, and we know that there are thousands of cases that are appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court that never reach that Supreme Court for actual arguments, and this is one of them. The decision that came out on Mark Meadows, it was not issued on its own. It was part of what's called the orders list that comes out at this point in the year, sometimes every week. And so there were a bunch of cases in which the court said, we're not taking this case up. This was just one that was on the list. The reason it jumps out is you see the name Meadows versus state of Georgia. But it's one of those cases that's been lingering for a while. Now that the U.S. Supreme Court has decided not to take it, Mark Meadows is going to have to fight this case in the state court system in Georgia. And one of his arguments is that the reason that you move this case out of the state court system and into the federal court system is that you don't want to have hostile state courts attacking federal officials, and that if you allow Georgia to prosecute Mark Meadows on a case like this, that could open the door in the future for other states in which the judicial system and the prosecutors are of one party to attack the other party when it's the party in charge of the White House. And basically, the argument from Meadows' team is that this is overturning nearly 200 years of precedent, whereas the federal courts that have ruled on this and have actually issued statements, unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, have said, no, the actions for which you're being charged aren't even part of your official duties as White House Chief of Staff. If nothing else, they're probably part of the Trump campaign, and that's something that you shouldn't have been doing as White House Chief of Staff.
You know, that's an interesting argument. Obviously, we've seen a lot of the list of Trump appointees over the last couple of days. And Mitch, that is a pretty scary proposition. You've got somebody like Lee Zeldin, for example, from New York, who's set to head up EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a scary proposition that states that maybe lean to the left side of the political aisle start taking the EPA, or specifically individuals like Lee Zeldin, to court, not federally, but in local courts. That could be a very interesting thing to watch over the next 4 years.
It certainly will be interesting. And I think in every respect in which you have someone taking an action that is clearly an action of a federal government official, they probably will have immunity and probably will be able to fight off these cases from state courts. The Mark Meadows situation is different in that while he said what the actions that he took were as White House Chief of Staff, the courts that have rejected the arguments have basically been saying, no, what you were doing was to help the Trump campaign. That's separate from your federal government role. And so you really can't rely on the immunity that would go to an administration official, because what you're talking about is election-related issues, which is something that you did on behalf of the Trump campaign, not on behalf of the office of the president.
Great update. Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get a look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. You're there.
News Talk 1110 and 99.3.
WBT.
It's 521. You are listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Also streaming live on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel this morning. You can check out the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast in your favorite podcast app or by visiting WBT.com and clicking on the podcast tab. The United States Supreme Court has declined to hear former North Carolina Congressman Mark Meadows' case in which he argued his prosecution on election interference charges should be moved from the state of Georgia to federal courts. Meadows, who served as former President Trump's chief of staff, continues to face charges from a Fulton County grand jury for allegedly conspiring to overturn the 2020 election result in Trump's favor. Lower federal courts had already ruled against Meadows, concluding that his alleged actions were not part of his federal duties as chief of staff, a decision that was upheld by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. The court noted that Meadows' actions appeared to be campaign-related and involved interference with state election procedures and had nothing to do with his federal responsibilities. Meadows' legal team argued that denying him a federal forum to defend his case could set a dangerous precedent moving forward, potentially exposing federal officials to politically motivated state prosecution in the future. They criticized the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals' application of a causal nexus test, which they argue has been outdated by legislative changes. With the Supreme Court refusing to hear his appeal, Meadows' case will proceed in Georgia courts, where he and other co-defendants, including former President Trump, do face charges under Georgia's RICO statute. Obviously, any prosecution of now President-elect Trump is, for all intents and purposes, essentially null and void, but individuals like former North Carolina Congressman and Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, still have some of that dangling over their head. We'll watch that case in Georgia for the former congressman and provide details not only here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, but on our website as well at carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:24. We've got an update this morning on the former labor commissioner in North Carolina. He resigned from his position just 1 week ago. Teresa Opeka from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the News Hour. Teresa, quick turnaround for Josh Dobson. What are you learning this morning?
Yeah, Nick, everybody thought, gee, where did he disappear to last week? He handed his resignation and it's like, that's it. There's no other announcement. But we all found out yesterday that he is the new president and CEO of the North Carolina Healthcare Association. So congratulations to Josh on his new role.
He spent a long time in public service. He was locally a county commissioner. I don't remember which part of the state. He then was in the General Assembly, then made his way to the Labor Commission. And in his resignation letter, he made the comment that he has served the community. And obviously, any amount of public service in that is highly commended. But going from the Labor Commissioner to this organization, tell us a little bit about what this group does and likely what he's to be doing leading it now.
Yeah, right. So to backtrack a little bit, I think 14 years, I think he was in public office from all his different positions. So what he's doing, he's going to be representing the more than 135 member hospitals, hospital systems rather, statewide. That's anything from any major hospital to say, Duke Hospital in Raleigh to be like an outpatient facility that's accredited, anything of that nature. The association, it's got more than 100-year history, so they've been around a long time. They've got a well-named, they're well known. He's going to try to issue more of a personal relationship since he's had more face time out in the public, being a county commissioner, being a state representative at one point, and also the labor commissioner. He's going to try to do that and get more community-based initiatives going.
Yeah, and you talk about a pretty dramatic change in the span of essentially 1 week's time, going from deciding not to run for re-election. It was the first thing that had people really scratching their heads. Decided not to do that, resigning from his position just 1 week after Election Day. You mentioned a 100-year history with this organization. Are they somebody that kind of flies under the radar, Teresa, or is this a group that often finds themselves in the midst of drama going on in the state? Is it something that people even know about?
They are pretty well known. In fact, they have come up numerous times. If we've had stories about different, maybe North Carolina not ranking so hot when it comes to healthcare ratings for cost of healthcare, quality of healthcare. I know we also had State Treasurer Falwell also has made comments about them, and we contacted the Healthcare Association for comments, saying that the health professionals are doing their best. They're doing to the best of their ability, and everybody they're basically working on new initiatives and of that nature. And again, stressing this is nothing to do with doctors or nurses in that matter. It's how the hospital systems are being run by the corporations or by any other people that are in authority figures, if you will. So yeah, they are pretty well known.
Well, you bring that up, and you brought up State Treasurer Dale Folwell, who's been at odds with the healthcare industry, and there are just a couple of major players in the state. You've got Novant and Aetna and a couple of other groups that operate these hospitals. And you did bring up, and we covered a story back a couple of weeks ago, continued poor ratings for healthcare in North Carolina. Teresa, as a growing state, there's so many folks, whether you like it or not, moving down from the Northeast and other areas, relocating to North Carolina. That's something that I presume is going to be a long-term threat, a long-term conversation.
Oh, I would think so, most definitely. Like you say, there's so many people coming here. And obviously, one of the things they want is good health care. We all want good health care across this country. So, yeah, I think that is going to be definitely looked at. And maybe, Josh Jobson could take maybe a better look at what's going on within the association systems and maybe get things more back on track, if you will. But, yeah, it is a major quality of life issue for everybody.
This organization, we often hear about the money that goes around in the North Carolina General Assembly. Is this organization a big lobbyer, or is that kind of separate groups that do that?
I think they are a lobbyer. I don't have figures offhand, but I think they do have some sway when it comes to lobbying power in the General Assembly.
A great update this morning. Teresa Opeka from the Carolina Journal joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:29, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to head back on over to the traffic center this morning and an update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. We're okay.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are continuing to keep track of the transition team for the Trump-Vance administration. And in a major announcement yesterday evening from the desk of President Donald J. Trump, he's announced that Elon Musk, alongside Vivek Ramaswamy, will lead the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, D-O-G-E, the popular cryptocurrency. Trump says together these two wonderful Americans will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy, slash excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and restructure federal agencies that are essential to the Save America movement. That on top of a couple of other major announcements, including announcing that Pete Hegseth, who most recently served as the co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, will take over as his Secretary of Defense. Hegseth is a veteran and has spent multiple tours overseas and continues to be an advocate for military men and women that have served and continue to serve. Some, again, major announcements coming out from the Trump team on their transition as to who is going to be in their cabinet. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it is now 5:37. There has been a lot of criticism about FEMA, not only here in North Carolina, but portions of Florida after two storms, both Helene and Milton, left devastation across numerous states in the southeastern half of the United States. To get details on some more drama with FEMA, political drama that is, Teresa Opeka from the Carolina Journal continues with us this morning. Teresa, you've got a story over at carolinajournal.com that is truly jaw-dropping in regards to political retaliation from FEMA. That's not good at all.
No, it definitely is not. We don't want any political retaliation, regardless of which party you are supporting. Story broke last week. Daily Wire had it first, that there was a FEMA representative by the name of Marnie Wilson telling her workers in Florida who were to people that were affected by Hurricane Milton not to go to people who had Trump campaign signs on their property. They thought they might be confrontational. They were just worried about, who knows what they were worried about, but they were instructed not to go near those houses. I believe there was at least 20 houses they avoided.
Wow.
So she also, So there was a story in Daily Mail, the British publication, and also, which they also have an American online presence. And she also went on a YouTube podcaster by the name of Roland Martin. She said, well, this happened not only in Florida, it also happened in the Carolinas. So she made that statement. And she said, I have the proof to back it up. I have all this proof. And it was just jaw-dropping to hear that, considering that, Governor Cooper's had numerous updates, and now back, I know it was middle of October, one in particular, he said, there's all this misinformation. This all must be stopped. It was also the Deanne Creswell, who's the FEMA administrator. She said the same, all this misinformation, you got to stop doing that. Well, so was it misinformation? Apparently it wasn't, after what we're hearing about all this coming out in the last couple of days.
And I guess, Teresa, not to get too maybe not to get too off track here, but it's a sad sign of the times when you've got people working for FEMA dealing with individuals that maybe not only lost loved ones, but have lost literally everything that they own, all of their possessions, and because they may or may not have supported somebody like President Donald Trump, FEMA and the federal government says, we're just not going to stop by and we're not going to help you because you could be confrontational. That's pretty disgusting.
It really is. It really is. And they're in their time of need. And I think one of the workers did comment to Daily Wire. They thought they were coming down there to help people, and they were instructed, hey, no, you can't. If that person's got a Trump sign on their house, can't go there. And they're like, it doesn't matter if you're a Trump supporter, if you were a Kamala Harris supporter. As a human being, we all need help if we're faced with that crisis. So it is truly disgusting. You're right.
There's been a lot of conversation after both the storms Milton and Helene that maybe we need to back off in terms of the federal government and its response to these storms and maybe make this a more local issue. You can imagine with a Republican coming into the White House, Republicans controlling the House and the Senate, there could be some serious reforms coming to FEMA because of some of these stories and storms, Teresa.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure that President-elect and former President Donald Trump is going to have something to say about it. He had something to say about it previously. He actually alluded to this, that there were some problems before of people not going to FEMA, not going to Republican areas. He did make that comment. Of course, Cooper had backlash for that. But you may see a lot of different reforms coming. And I know in the story that I had, we had both North Carolina U.S. Senators Tom Tillis and Ted Budd comment. Ted Budd said there will definitely be an investigation about it. So I would expect to see even locally or at the state level, some House oversight might actually be looking and stepping into this and seeing what they can do.
Yeah, accountability is one thing. Unfortunately, Teresa, this has already happened, and now we have heard that individual. I'm not sure if they've been fired. I heard originally reassigned or no longer in that position. But you can't really roll back the clocks and change that there could have been people that needed this help desperately and again, didn't get it because of their political ideology.
Yes, yes. I believe she was fired. And I
Okay.
think she was also let go from another job that she had in California. That was a separate issue, that another story that I was reading. So I think she was, but you're right. I mean, people are still going to need help. Like it's, the news cycle, how quickly it goes. And it's like, okay, we're on to the next thing. We're on to the election, right? So maybe some people have forgotten about Helene, have forgotten about Milton, but it's not going to be, these people are not going to forget. A lot of them are facing health issues right now due to like unclean water, and now with winter coming up, I mean, in the mountains, it gets pretty cold. It gets cold everywhere, but especially in the mountains, there's a lot of things to consider. How could you forget these people? But regardless, like you said, we're all human beings on a human level. Just to be accusatory or not want to go to support somebody, regardless of what political party you support, is just incredible in this day and age.
Let me wrap with this because I think it's an interesting and valid question. You mentioned Cooper's comments and the FEMA administrator's comments, misinformation this, misinformation that. Here's yet another example, Teresa, where something that was called misinformation has, for all intents and purposes, been 100% verified. Do people have a good reason to have a lack of trust in these organizations like FEMA? And you can only imagine that situations and stories like this are only going to make it worse as we head into next hurricane season and the winter storm season.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, why wouldn't you have a mistrust? I mean, and that was, look at the mainstream media, like this past election. People, they all say mainstream media, which is, is dead. How can you trust people on this platform where they're spouting this and everything else when they're being told what to say, or what long as whatever political party is telling you is, what they're aiming for? How could you trust them? But it sounds like even the Republican side, I contacted a few different people. I did hear back from Congressman Chuck Edwards, who's in District 11, which covers most of Western North Carolina. His communications director told me that it was an internal issue with FEMA and directed me to contact FEMA. It was excuse me for saying it, a tone deaf comment. That's the people that you're representing out in Western North Carolina, even maybe just to say something, at least like Ted Budd said, hey, we're going to investigate it. That was Congressman Edwards, communications person. I'm not sure if he knew that that's what they put out there, but it's an internal issue. It's not an internal issue. It affected all those people in Western North Carolina. So yeah, you're right. I mean, how can you trust anybody at this point? That's how I would feel if I was living out there.
I encourage our audience this morning to watch some of those videos and read more on Teresa's story over at carolinajournal.com. It's now 5:45, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. We have a
It's 5:53. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour on News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT, streaming live on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel this morning as well. Taking a look at some statewide news, Josh Dobson, who is the former North Carolina Labor Commissioner, has been named the new president and CEO of the North Carolina Healthcare Association, succeeding Stephen Lawler, who retired after 7 years holding that same position. The NCHA Board of Trustees conducted a nationwide search for the role, which represents over 135 hospital systems across the state. Dobson's passionate about healthcare and policy, emphasized the importance of equitable healthcare access as well as hospital sustainability levels in his new roles. He will oversee the strategic partners within the organization as well as the North Carolina Healthcare Foundation, which supports healthcare innovation. Dobson previously served as a state representative and a McDowell County commissioner and will now transition fully into the private sector after some 20 years in public service. All of that added up and combined, he did unexpectedly resign from the office 1 week ago, a day after Election Day last week, and we are now learning his new position. He'll be the president and CEO of the North Carolina Healthcare Association. Tracking our top story this morning, FEMA is accused of instructing volunteers not only in Florida after the impacts of Hurricane Milton, but as well in North Carolina after Hurricane Helene to avoid homes that had Trump signs either on them or near them. We are learning information from a now fired FEMA worker known as Marnie Washington. She was fired after a text chain was leaked that showed her instructing colleagues to avoid houses that had Trump signs in their yard. She told the Daily Mail that FEMA is lying about the scandal and they are using her as a scapegoat for what she claimed to be wider practices within the Federal Emergency Management Agency. She went on a podcast over the last couple of days and talked about this situation and talked about how FEMA talks about avoidance in regards to some of the procedures in which they follow when they are heading into an area and providing aid. She was on with YouTube podcaster Roland Martin, and she said that these situations are not isolated at all and that she's got the evidence to back it up. This is all coming after we heard from individuals like Governor Roy Cooper, the head of FEMA, that anybody that questioned FEMA's response, anybody that made comments that they may have seen things that seemed to be politically motivated or politically biased, that they were peddling in misinformation. Roy Cooper going as far as to saying you must stop saying these things because these rumors hurt those that still need help the most. Important to note, a Carolina Journal did reach out to Governor Roy Cooper and FEMA to comment on these new allegations. Neither of them, neither the governor or the current FEMA administrator or anybody within the organization responded for comment. U.S. Senator Ted Budd commenting on this new development, saying this will be investigated. Anyone who abuses the power of the federal government to hurt North Carolinians in need will be held accountable. I will personally see to it. Some other comments on social media as well. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis instituting a statewide investigation there on some of those directives. This is going to be a long-term story. We are going to keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We are back tomorrow morning at 5 right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.